Good evening, everybody, and welcome to the June Philipstown Conservation Board meeting. I'm Andy Gower, the chairperson, and I'm calling the meeting to order. So, first order of business, are we ready to approve the minutes for March? Okay.
I move to do so.
Second? Second. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. So approved. Are we ready to approve the minutes for April?
So moved.
Second?
Second.
Aye.
So approved. We have correspondence from the planning board in regard to Kingsley major site plan. Is that over to you, Max?
Yeah, so I reviewed the referral that was sent to Andy in regards to a site plan that was sent to our board pertaining to a new development along Old Albany Post Road North. The site does have regulated water courses that run through the property. After reviewing the plans and actually getting out on the site itself, I saw no need for the Conservation Board's involvement. All construction activities are beyond the 100-foot regulated area, and therefore I've just stipulated that the wetland buffer be delineated with orange construction fence and silt fence or erosion control be put in front of that. And I cut that memo a few days ago and sent that over to the town engineer. So our involvement at this point is not going to be required unless their plans change.
Does anybody have any questions?
No.
Okay. Okay, what's not on the agenda, we're going to have a very short presentation on, let me have the correct term, the Green Corridors Plan. Yes, please.
Hello, my name is Nicole Wooten. I'm the Director of Natural Resources at the Hudson Highlands Land Trust. And we are not on your agenda, but we have an exciting announcement, which is our Green Corridors Plan is finally complete and ready for folks to view. So you all up here have a copy of it in your hands, and you all are welcome to Google it alongside. If you go to hhlt.org and search for Green Corridors, you'll come up with this plan. So our Green Corridors Plan is a comprehensive and long-term study that we did with support from the Department of Environmental Conservation Hudson River Estuary Program. And one of the representatives is here today, Laura Heedy, who helped make this possible. And it is a study of where people and wildlife need to move across our landscape in order to thrive. So some of this is thinking in terms of climate change and the need for migratory corridors, but also thinking about walking paths and reducing our carbon footprint by walking rather than driving places. So the plan itself, I have a long and comprehensive and eloquent speech for y'all that Ted, my associate, or Katrina may give it another time. But just to give you a general idea, there's plenty of great information on where wildlife move, sensitive species in this area, what their needs are. A lot of that information we got with the New York Natural Heritage Program. They actually did a special study in this area, both modeling and on the ground, just to check those models. We also gathered stakeholder input, so folks like y'all helped complete surveys and do workshops to tell us where you've seen wildlife move or where you think people may need to move across this landscape. And we put all that together with information from conservation partners like the Hudson Highlands Land Trust and other land conservation organizations that work in this region. We created a comprehensive priority map, which you can find in the plan, and that shows where the hot spots are for movement. So we have all that information all squished together and torn apart if you want to see it in the pieces. And then we wrote out some of the ways that you can use that information immediately, applying with planning, policy, and the financial tools. So there are a list of 33 federal and state funding sources, and then also private foundational sources that can support the work to protect these special areas. And that is all available and open to the public. This is a lot of research that we wanted to put in your all's hands, just knowing that you are doing some incredible work that goes beyond the scope of just our little land trust and our partners. So we want to empower folks to help protect wildlife and to help connect their community. So that is the Green Corridors plan. And thank you for, I know this was very brief, but if anybody has any questions, feel free again to check that out, hhlt.org, and search for Green Corridors. And we are happy to answer any questions you may have. And there's also an explanatory video that goes into more detail too. So if you want more of this, but a little bit longer and more detailed, it's up on the website. So thank you all.
Cheryl, do we have anybody representing Steensma and Prins on Kings Dock Road? You want to just give us a quick update, Max?
Yeah, so after
Thank you.
our last meeting, it was suggested to the applicant that they be referred to the planning board and have a pre-application meeting to discuss any overlap in terms of code that the planning board would administer in regards to that project. I sat in on that pre-application meeting, and we're in the process of gathering our notes from that meeting. They have not been distributed yet to the applicant, so we are waiting to hear back from the town engineer and the town council on how the planning board will be involved, specifically in regards to steep slope regulations and overlays that they would administer. So that's basically where we stand now. I would suggest to you, Andy, that we wait until those questions are answered before we act any further on the application, and allow them to remain on the agenda until we get some of those administrative questions solved.
I think that makes sense. Okay, so let's move on to the third item, which is the Glenwood Boathouse Walking Trail. Is there anybody here representing them? I guess not.
The only update that I have for that is they had a architect reach out to me and directed them to file an application and follow the same process that they'd had in the past. So I don't know if they submitted anything. So.
They submitted drawings of a bridge. You know, the bridge that we had looked at.
Yeah, that would be
But no.
pertaining to the trail project.
Yeah.
I think they want to do renovations to the boathouse on the property
Right.
as well.
What's on the agenda, though, is the basically the walk.
The walking trail.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
The one that we.
Yep, the one that we walked.
Right.
Yep, exactly. Okay, Manitoga. Manitoga?
We were on last month, and we did have a site visit per your request with our designer and builder, Peter Jensen, and he did submit some more drawings per your request, and I was just hoping I would hear back from you about that.
So what we had asked for those of us that had gone to the site visit is we thought that it would probably be difficult and economically taxing to try to have an engineer or a surveyor mark where every single boulder is and what would be done. So instead, using photos and overlays to show how they're going to rebuild the waterfall. And I think the question at this point is, are we comfortable issuing a permit for this? There is a narrative of how the construction would be done. At this point, you're not touching the pond. There's no dredging. It is just the repair of the waterfall, where over time it's been washed out, both on, right.
And I think what we witnessed when we were there was that waterfall is in dire need of some repair, or it's going to completely change
Yeah.
the landscape there. So,
Where are you having the DEC?
I have an application for the DC and the Army Corps of Engineers, both are the same application, but ready to send to them. Just kind of wanted to hear if there was anything more that maybe I could buffer that application with.
In the past, we've waited to issue permits until they've kind of given the final stamp of approval, and you've gotten permits back from them. We can proceed that way if the board's comfortable. We can potentially issue a conditional permit, conditioned on the fact that you will be getting those permits, and once you obtain them, you can submit them to the town, and then we will issue our permit based on what you've provided, if there's no further stipulations that this board would want to impose.
I mean, I would suggest issuing a conditional permit if everybody is happy with the narrative of how we're protecting the stream. And essentially, at a certain point, I won't call it, yeah, I guess it is siphoning, we're shutting down the waterfall itself and piping it into the pond, true?
Yeah,
Right.
the stream course will continue, but
Essentially no machinery other than a derrick and a motorized wheelbarrow to move material. One of the questions we had with the person that is doing the actual work is he wanted to use geotextile to hold riprap in place under the boulders. The DEC didn't want it. And I think we were recommending, if possible, to use it.
the DC, person that I spoke with, they just wanted some substantiation for why
Why,
we really
okay.
wanted to use that material. And if they thought that that was right, that would be fine, but they wanted to know what the reasons were, if there was not an alternative or something. And I think Peter Jensen has said that will hold together well, and the way he's going to use it. So I have that in my application, and I can get that off this week. The Army Corps of Engineers, it's a month and a half. It's, I think, a 45-day period. If they don't respond, then you're good to go. But the DEC has also said, since it's less than 100 linear feet, that they do not need to make it a public conversation. So we probably, and they don't have certain times that they listen to it, so I think that we should hear back from them, this summer. Yeah, so
mean,
we
I
are
think-
planning, like to do it in the fall, in November.
Right. So I don't want to see them necessarily miss the window of opportunity for this. So if we're comfortable making a conditional permit, I think we should think about what, other than DEC and possible Army Corps of Engineer, and it would be Army Corps of Engineer because it flows into the Hudson tidal water, what else we might want to have as part of a conditional permit. And since it is a conditional permit, we could add to it as we get closer.
Yeah, it would be more of a closed conversation between, if you vote tonight, it would be between you and I after we receive the permits back from DEC and Army Corps. And we can impose following exactly what you've submitted to them, or we can discuss, I think what Andy's saying is we can discuss a little bit more tonight with the board if they feel like there should be further stipulations put in place to protect the regulated resource. If not, I think the easiest thing to do would just be to proceed with what they suggest the protective measures would be if they do issue you permits. And then once we receive those, we would just cut you an identical permit.
That means as soon as I hear from them, then I submit them to you.
Yep.
And then would we wait till the next meeting or whatever?
No, they'll vote, if the board will vote on that tonight, then you don't have to come back to a meeting.
So long as you're permitted
Right.
through
Right.
DEC and, yeah.
With
any
the
other-
same narrative that it has now.
Yeah.
Right,
Yes.
right.
Wasn't able to go to the site visit, so I do apologize. But, so the water, as it comes over the dam, you're not going to be changing that profile or raising it or moving that part of it at all, right?
No, the dam is not affected, it's all the way across the other side.
It's all just
of
the side
of the
areas.
pond.
Oh, okay. And then from the standpoint of the placement of the rocks, I think we talked about it last time, would you be using like historical pictures to try and replicate original locations if you could?
Yes, to the best of our ability, we will. We have mostly pictures of comparison of what boulders have been misplaced, and we know we will use what the stream looks, the configuration of things upstream look like to sort of
As a guide?
that back. The one place we are going to restore with photos is of the Midway pool, which it was a pool that was about 18 inches deep, and we do have photos of that without the boulders in it, and currently now it has quite a lot of boulder and cement chunks that are in it now, and that's the material we tend to use to rebuild up above.
Okay, great, thank you.
So the pool, that will be.
Other questions or comments? Do I have a motion to issue a issue permit in a second? All in favor? Okay.
Yeah, so if you just send me copies of the permits that they issue to the building department, then we'll be able to cut you our permit.
Would you like to see those applications as well, or the?
You can provide, you can send them to me, yeah. But I would rather see what they've commented on in terms of what they are concerned about and how you respond to it.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, thank you very much.
Next is Jonathan and Anna Maria Pierce, Lot 3, Rockwald Road.
I'm Liz Campbell-Kelly, landscape designer with Hudson Garden Studio, and we have Tom Lewis from Trillium Invasive Species Management, and
I'm Vinny Sickles with River Architects. So we were, as part of our conditions of our permit that was issued, we were supposed to come back with the findings of the invasives and the proposed planting plans for preventing the invasive establishment. And also to restore the wetlands that are near the property. As a part of this last, hopefully, submission, we're submitting a revised site plan for the residents. Basically, we're reducing the scope of the project with the removal of the detached garage and basically rerouting the driveway around the side of the hill to pull the garage into the basement of the residence and incorporate the two-bay garage into the lower level of the house. That change puts most of the impervious area from the parking area outside of the wetlands buffer, and overall there was some reduction to the decks and some walkways, and it nets a little bit of a reduction in total coverage area with the driveways and everything totaled up with this plan. And then with the loss of the garage, we're also relocating our solar array from the garage roof to the southern-facing roof of the main residence now.
And in
Okay.
terms of what's different now with the landscape and the invasive species management plan
sure.
versus...
Yeah. So we made 2 site visits since we last met. One was in, April, thank you, to look for spring ephemerals, and we found a few skunk cabbage, some things like that, but not a huge area, so there wasn't anything that we felt like we would really change in terms of the areas that we wanted to address with herbicide or hand pulling. And then we went again in May to review kind of the extent of the herbaceous invasive. So in the documents that we provided, We've updated on the second page, adding kind of the concentration of stilt grass of where that is. And what Tom and I found was basically that it's, as we had kind of imagined, coming through those drainage channels and kind of collecting in the wetland area. And also at that meeting, Max Garfinkel was present, so we were able to walk the site with him and kind of look at everything and kind of think about priorities and things like that, which is also really helpful. And I think our conclusion was in that area that there's not going to be much that we can do with preventing the flow of stiltgrass through the site because it's always going to be coming from uphill and downstream. And then another thing that we reviewed with Max is kind of updating our conservation goals was to establish to look at what his priorities were and kind of adapt those as our priorities. And that was to establish natives in the junction of where that wetland is and where the stream is coming and where it crosses over the driveway. So also on that second page, there's kind of like a dashed line around this area here, and this is kind of where we're going to be concentrating most of our efforts. As part of that, providing buffers and erosion control to those adjacent slopes along the stream corridor and the slope. And we are also going to, in the areas that where we've disturbed, create habitat, so a native meadow on the septic field, and then to improve the wetland plant communities in the existing wetland. So that has kind of, I think concentrated our thinking of where we're going to approach the site. And then the other thing, so then we kind of, this landscape management area map that we presented last time, we've refined a little bit. We've added an area where we'll have a temporary deer fence, which is around area 3 and 3A, which is the wetland at the bottom of that slope. And that will really be, we're thinking of that as a temporary deer fence in order to establish shrubs within that area. And that, in 3 to 5 years, when those shrubs are established, that we'll remove it, and then we'll have to live with the deer pressure that is there. Along the 5 and 5A area, we're going to be planting a lot of sedges and ferns and things that the deer don't really eat. So in those areas, we'll be looking at planting things that are not as delicious as other things to the deer. And then the last page shows the kind of installation methods and plant lists for each of those areas. So it really talks about strategies for each area. So, and then overall, we have this kind of overarching strategy, which is to use highly competitive plants that are habituated to their particular conditions of sun and shade, wet and dry in those areas because of the extreme deer pressure and invasive species pressure. And then we have the proposed management calendar. So really, we have year 1, which is kind of what we're in right now. The clients have been really good about hand weeding stiltgrass and garlic mustard on site, and they also have been doing seeding. They relocated some of the Galosacia that we found on the site that was going to be impacted by construction. So they're pretty on it. They've been on it, and they've shown a kind of interest in doing as much of the work themselves as they can. So like on this, you'll see really the one thing that Trillium will be involved with going forward is an herbicide application to address the ailanthus trees. And at the same time, while they're there, they'll do a mugwort spray at the same time, kind of in conjunction. And then we've established in here, year 2 through 5, a kind of monitoring schedule, which we reviewed with Max, and you should look at it and see if I've gotten it right. But it basically means that we would do a site visit in May, assess where we're at, what survived, make a report to give to Max, and then we would kind of discuss the permit for the following year and what we feel like is necessary. Tom, do you want to talk about anything that you found or how you modified your report as well, any at all?
I mean, I did make some changes to the management plan. Mostly, it kind of was to reflect their kind of desire to do all the work on there, and I felt like how I had written the plan the first time kind of prescribed certain ways that I would do it. And so, given that they're not pesticide applicators and or probably don't want to do that throughout all their property, I changed a couple of things to make it so they could, help guide them in dealing with the invasives in these selected areas. And I think that if they wanted to do more, they've kind of thought about reaching out to do something further in, but not right now. Right?
Yeah.
I think that summarizes it.
Yeah, that's kind of where we're at. So.
So Max, where are we in the permitting process?
So we haven't issued a permit yet for the construction of the house.
Right, we have.
There's stipulated on finalizing these restoration plans. And so the permit that we would want to issue, either today or a subsequent meeting, would be for the construction of the house, accepting this restoration plan. Something that you guys should think about tonight would be setting a timeline in terms of how many years we would hold the applicant and landowner to maintaining this plan and reporting back to this board or myself annually until that time frame has lapsed, to gauge the successfulness of what they're proposing. After that site visit that we had conducted together, it was quite evident that the majority of the property is invasive. Has the potential to become heavily dominated by invasives that would need, an indefinite amount of management time. So I suggested to them to kind of give them a direction as to focus on managing invasives to allow all the restoration plantings to succeed, or use that as a way forward. So how to allow what they're planting each year to proliferate to the best possible extent, and to ensure that for whatever time frame you're binding them to, they can establish themselves in those areas, giving them the best chance to kind of be successful in their restoration approach. So that was kind of where that meeting ended, in terms of my input. And so this is what they're proposing now, which I think is a little bit more directed and guided for the board to make a decision on. So that's where we are at this point.
Comments, questions?
I think it's an incredible plan. It's one of the most thorough that I've seen in the 15 years that I've been on this board. It's terrific, but the devil is in the details, right? Mm-hmm. So, I mean, this is a substantial project for a landowner to maintain and manage on their own. Max, my question is really for you. If this does not work, what happens?
Yeah, in the past, we've asked for a bond, a financial bond, or we've, in more extreme cases, dealt directly with the building department to kind of negotiate getting the certificate of occupancy revoked, potentially, or having that kind of hang over the homeowner's head. But that was kind of up to the board at the time, and I guess how compliant the applicant was, and what we felt their intentions were. I mean, it's also something that we can look back at in another year, and see how the applicant has kept to their agreements, essentially, through this permit.
I mean, this calendar really sets out a roadmap for success, but
It has to be done.
it has to be done, and it has to be continued beyond this calendar, right? I mean, we all know that anybody who lives here knows that the invasive species do not just, go gently into the night.
So is there opportunity then to put it into the permit that we'd have a bond, and then that bond would be enough to hire somebody if the owners can't maintain it for a period of time or something like that? Would we go to that provision, or?
I Something like, when we meet again in a year and we see what's successful, I mean, then you would look at an alternative strategy. Like if things aren't working out, then you would try and figure out something else, or you would even further limit the scope. I think they are being ambitious about what they're touching, but it's actually also we're kind of only touching basically like the limit of work in a way. So they will have to do something in those areas. I mean, I feel, a lot of what's in the plans are seed mixes as well, and I feel, in my experience over the last 5 years of putting in seed mixes, you throw them in, they establish, and over, maybe by year 3, they're doing okay, and you will have some invasives, but you'll still have, as Max is saying, you will have natives as well. I mean, I feel like it would be, in my opinion, and, it's obviously up to you, that, assessing in a year or 2 years when we do that report back seems prudent to me. And it may be that you do have to modify the scope. It might be that the scope is not possible, like you're saying, and then do you have to realign your goals? But I think holding them to this kind of ambitious standard might, could be extremely difficult and might not be realistic, as you're saying. But, we're here to try our best.
I mean, I support a flexible approach where we look at it again next year and see what's happening and maybe make some changes. I don't know. Scott?
The easiest way then would be to ask for a bond. And the board can set that amount, and then we can reassess in a year. And once they achieve or show that they're making steps forward in the timeline, that bond can get released by the board. And
So the bond gets sort of updated yearly?
we'd probably ask for an amount now.
Right, and then in a year, when we have the next report, we vote on whether or not the bond keeps going.
I would assume we would use a third-party bond on this, rather than the town holding it. I mean, that's something to ask the attorney.
Yeah.
Because it could be a substantial bond. You might be looking at a $50,000 or more bond, and then it's far more affordable if it's done by a third party that you're paying every year. It's a form of insurance, lack of a better term for it. Most contractors have a bond, and rather than putting away several $100,000, they're paying a third party. I think we'd have to ask the attorney on that. What's not on this revised site plan, or I'm missing it, is we're not showing the wetland delineation, or am I missing it on this plan? Okay. So we have, basically you have succeeded in really moving everything out, other than the existing road. The proposed site plan by river.
It's the crosshatch band.
So it's the cross. Okay. Yep, that's what I thought originally. So essentially, what we're doing is, what we don't often do is we do have a house, though it is an essential structure that is within the buffer. The big change they've made, and it is a substantial change, is making the garage, I guess, underneath the house rather than a separate building.
Lessens the footprint.
Significantly lessens the footprint.
There's still quite a bit of house in the buffer, if I'm reading this right?
That hasn't changed with the previous application.
Yeah.
What's that?
The house footprint hasn't been changed since the last time we presented the plans. We just reduced the size of the deck and the patio areas, but the house footprint is unchanged.
So the only thing that's been really changed is the garage as well?
Yeah, just the garage and the parking driveway approach to the garage is the major change.
Those of us that have been at the site, it's a tough site. So, the only alternative of moving the house out of the wetland buffer is we're starting to move into steep slopes. And I'm not sure that's necessarily a very good compromise. My personal opinion is the amount of mitigation and restoration they're doing is a very good trade-off. I don't know how the rest of the board feels.
That's why it has to be handled so well.
Yes, absolutely.
Because it is a trade-off.
Absolutely agreed. So at this point, I think a conditional permit, if we're ready for that, would be more in place rather than a full permit, so that we could develop a full narrative, including the bond and what other missing pieces we have. What would be the length of the maintenance, the construction narrative? I mean, is the board comfortable?
I just have a question on the septic. So that's there's a part here that says septic tank, right? So that septic tank is in the buffer?
Jason will be revising the septic plan and reissuing that to the county for approval based on the revised site work that has to happen grading to the driveway. So the septic needs to be located, leaving the house in a different location. But that'll be resubmitted with the county. We can resubmit that approved drawing to you once the county has approved it.
But it is in the buffer or not?
It's still being designed. It's still being designed?
Designed. So I don't think we can permit anything without knowing that, right?
No, we can wait, because what we are missing is the engineer's drawings, which would be the septic and the septic tank. Right? So then maybe we should wait till next month.
The field shouldn't be changing, it's just the tank location.
But right now, we don't have plans for the field.
The field was previously submitted with the last permit, it's just the...
Right.
Right, yeah.
But the house has changed.
The fields are on the top part here, on this side.
Yeah. This was the previously submitted drawing. Yeah, the septic field is off to the right of where the garage was previously. So it's off to the right side of the turnaround of the driveway. What's that?
The majority of it is outside of the buffer, right?
All the field is outside the buffer.
Okay.
I think we insisted on
Yeah.
it outside the buffer, yeah. But I would feel more comfortable if we had that engineer's drawing before we issue a permit, right? And we know that the county is on board with where
Were those submitted?
the tank is.
That was submitted with the last submission, yes.
And where would the tank location, where do you suspect the tank location to be? If you were to, do you have a sense of that?
We were looking at locating it between the pull-off and the entrance of the driveway. Is one location.
So the tank would be within the wetland buffer?
Possibly. Yeah, this location will be in the buffer, yes, that's right.
It's an alternative would be, depending on how rocky it is to put a commercial tank underneath the driveway. You know, the driveway itself, which is outside of the buffer.
This dogleg
Yeah.
area, yeah. Yeah.
I think that the entrance to the garage is currently downhill from the field in this iteration, so we
Can have a pump up?
have to do that.
So I do agree. I think we do need the final septic plan. Right, I think we're all in agreement. We have that, then I think we can issue a permit.
If the tank was in the buffer, would that be a issue, or I guess?
It's not ideal. We try to avoid it unless there's no other place for it.
I guess we're trying to avoid the pump up and gravity feed from the
Right,
house if possible.
understood.
I mean, the goal is essentially nothing in the buffer, you know, we will look at systems that have to be there for the house, you know, in extreme circumstances, but like all of these properties now are extreme, so every property that comes to us has an exception, and you know, it's just getting to the point where the people that are coming here, we, you know, should be prepared to do these type of, you know, things up front, and not, you know, keep moving it into the buffer and then out of the buffer, and, you know, should just start thinking about it out of the buffer as the start from, you know, first go.
That was the original intent, but we're kind of wedged in here, so it's a little bit a tight squeeze with the grades and the steep slopes and the wetlands on all three sides.
It's a complicated property when you get smaller and smaller spaces to build in, you know, and those are the properties that are left in the county, so know what you're getting into when you're building these properties, you know.
When would your clients like to start construction in the ideal world? And don't say tomorrow. Okay, so that does give us time. What I would suggest is, because we're not necessarily comfortable with a septic tank, is what I'm hearing within the buffer.
I am not comfortable.
Yeah, I'm not either. So what I'd like to see is, give us an alternate plan. One would be outside of the buffer with a pump up. There's a lot of systems in this town that have pump ups. And then you could show us if you want one without, if you still feel strongly about it, and we'll decide what we're most comfortable with. That sound like a plan?
It also has to be approved by Putnam County, so, I mean, they have to walk the line with the county as well, right? So,
I think the county is going to be easier than we are, though.
probably, in our experience.
What about a peat system here now? I mean, in this case, the fields, the way they're proposing it, are out of the buffer, but are they close enough that we should be considering that?
I mean, I would defer to a professional engineer at that point to fully understand.
Was approved by the county for the perk tests that were done.
Yeah, again, I mean, if that's an alternative the board want to explore, I'd put that back on the applicant to show all those alternatives and why or why not that they want to pursue that decision, so that we get a fully educated discussion about that.
I mean, when it's close, you know, to the wetlands or to the streams and things like that, we've asked for this mitigation before. Those are on record. So if you would consider that, at least, and provide a, you know, rationale for or against.
Makes sense.
Do you want to tackle in terms of a bond amount? Do you want to think about numbers now, or do you want to wait? And do you want to think about years of monitoring that we would like to impose? Typically, we've done as little as 3 and up to 5.
Right. I think we had said 5 in the last meeting, didn't we?
Okay.
Because these are long-term projects, I think we have to just consider that.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. And if the town, I think we need to find out if the town allows a third-party bond. If they do, then my feeling the bond would be somewhere between $50,000 and probably $75,000. If it's not a third-party bond, unfortunately, it's going to have to be less.
We've done third-party bonds before on timber harvests. So that's definitely something the town is open to.
So then usually, you know, a bond of that size, I'm going to guess, would be a payment of several $100s a year, rather than, you know, somebody have to tying up that type of capital. So,
Okay.
all right, so,
So the restoration plan is good. We're gonna get back to you with the bond information. But you still owe us all the detailed drawings and how you surmised coming up with your septic design in the end, and why or why not you want to justify proceeding with what you're presenting with to us.
right, and I think we are recommending that if nothing else, have an alternative where the entire septic is out of the wetland buffer, which in this case means removing the septic tank from the wetland buffer.
Yes.
Yep. Anybody have anything else? Okay. Thank you, and we'll see you in July. Yes, I guess Davoren has been dealt with.
Oh, okay.
Okay, so at this point, as I get my papers together, let us move on to the Hudson Valley Shakespeare Festival. Good to see you. Just as an introduction to the board, to my board, the Conservation Board, the Planning Board has asked us for input. Again, they're moving along in the CEQA process. And what we had asked you for information about was, in terms of the bridge, tent siting, meadow restoration, and I'm not sure you're going to be able to tell us a tremendous amount without more than a preliminary site plan, is a little bit of a discussion of the stormwater, the SHWIP. With that said, what our task is essentially is really to give the planning board some preliminary input. You know, essentially what they'd like to know from us is, it goes back to CEQA. What we're asking about, do we feel, and this is in the words of the law of CEQA, you know, that what the applicants are doing demonstrates that the actions that they've chosen to take are ones that avoid or minimize adverse environmental impacts to the maximum extent practical. And environmental impacts are not only just the environment, wildlife, flora and fauna, and aquifers, but also do go into, to a certain extent, view sheds, historic areas, and so on. But that is our purview. The planning board itself, their significant concerns about the project, just so we know, are the bridge, the tent siting, traffic increases, noise, and water, meaning water usage.
Before we begin discussion or entertain applicants, I just would like to disclose that the owner of this property is the chairman of the board of the nonprofit subsidiary that I work for. So if anyone has any misgivings about me participating in this conversation or commenting or voting, please share them. I just wanted to make sure everybody knew that.
But it's a totally different entity that's not involved with Shakespeare.
Completely different entity. I just felt like I needed to disclose that.
Fine. Does anybody have any? Okay.
I don't.
No, I don't think we do. So what we'd really like you to do is, you know, tell us more about the bridge, the tent siting, and meadow restoration, and anything you might be able to in terms of SHWIP.
Sure. Good evening, Mr. Chairman, members of the board, members of the public. My name's P. Daniel Hollis. I'm the project attorney from the law firm of Hollis, Laidlaw, and Simon in Mount Kisco, New York. The chairman has accurately outlined the questions that were posed to us to bring some of our team here to speak about tonight. And we'll start with the bridge. I'm here tonight with Mr. Glenn Watson, who's known to your board, and your Mr. Garfinkel very well. We'll talk a little bit about the bridge. Then Mr. Paul Waddell can talk about soil management and water budget. And I think we've made our full presentation with our EAF to the planning board. Hopefully you've had a chance to look at it. I can make references to certain pages or schedules in the EAF as we're going through it, or Glenn or Paul can, and we'll hopefully be able to enlighten you as to the project that you have questions about. You know, we've made a very thorough application. Mr. Gaba's not here. I don't pretend to want to take up your time by giving a dissertation on the law of secret, which is, you know, quite convoluted to say the least. But, you know, it's important to note that your board has sort of continuing jurisdiction over this matter, and that the secret process is to identify potential adverse environmental impacts. And then our job as the applicant is to either eliminate or mitigate those. And that you can do that before we get to you for a wetlands permit, or before we go to the planning board, back to the planning board for a site plan. So it's really important to realize that the secret process is the beginning, where the applicant makes a commitment to mitigate. And then the devil is in the details, as was said a few minutes ago. And that's when we come back to you for the conservation plan, be it how the stormwater runs off the bridge. That's something you can address. If you're not satisfied with our design plans at that point, you can make it your point that we correct that shortcoming, and we'll do it at that time. So this is a iterative process, and it's a continuing jurisdiction for you when we come back to you for the permit that we're required to obtain from you. So Glenn, do you want to talk about the bridge a little bit? Can I help?
First of all, I think the discussion has to start why the bridge is where it is. I think it's an important driving factor in the thing. A lot of comments have been made with regard to why don't you rebuild the dam and take it out there. Well, that was looked at. It was seriously considered. It was rejected for two particular reasons. One, the dam would have to be much bigger in terms of the traveled way that crosses the top of it isn't wide enough to cover take two-way traffic. And so it would have to be widened. It would have to be much more work in the stream, much more disturbance in that particular area. Equally important, and I think that what tipped it, is that the sight distance is unsafe. It's well below what can be achieved, or what you need to achieve to have a safe sight distance. So using the bridge, the existing dam rather, as an alternative had to be rejected. It was suggested by a couple of people that we come in from the lower portion of Snake Hill Road, the part that runs through the, I guess it's the 7th fairway and green. And there are two entrances into the property that cross the aqueduct. The entrances themselves actually work. They have enough sight distance. The grade isn't so bad, but when you start looking at what you have to do in order to get yourself from the maintenance area to the parking lot, it's a tremendous amount of disturbance crossing the hill. You obviously can't go straight because it's just plain too steep. It's 35% grade. So you have to go crisscross back and forth across the property, and the disturbance is just tremendous. It's well over 5 acres of disturbance. The other alternative would be to use what I call the back entrance. That's the road that goes straight down from the clubhouse down to Philipsbrook Road in this case. And there's a couple of problems with that. First of all, it's too steep. It's well over 18% grade. It's one thing for workmen or people that are there all the time to drive that and know that, or a trained driver to work it. It's a whole other thing for an unfamiliar set of pedestrians or not pedestrians, say drivers to drive it. So we looked at grading that, and it's basically the same problem. You have to crisscross back and forth along the grade to get up, and the disturbance is about the same, another 5 acres of disturbance. Complicating that problem is the fact that that road is built over the aqueduct where there is no right-of-way, and that would have to be corrected, and that actually exacerbates the situation with regard to the steep slopes that you have to cross. And finally, it would require widening and paving Philipsbrook Road, a dirt road, and I'm not going to that meeting, if you want to know the truth. So we looked at those alternates, and what we chose was fit the bill. Basically, it's at a place along Snake Hill Road, and I always get them mixed up, but it's a place along Snake Hill Road where you can get the required sight distance for the speed each way, where you can get onto the property. You can't get onto the property there without going over the wetland and without crossing the wetland buffer. But we looked at that problem, and we think we've come up with a solution that minimizes the disturbance in the wetland buffer and avoids wetland buffer disturbance, avoids wetland disturbance entirely. So these are precedent images. Bridge is not designed, but they give us an idea of what we're looking at. And what we're talking about is that the abutments, the ends of the bridge, run it right up against Snake Hill Road, and the other one past the wetlands on the uphill side, the side away from the road, having an abutment that would support the ends of the bridge. It's a fairly big undertaking. It's mostly in the wetland buffer. And then what has been added to it relatively recently when we talked to the structural engineers, in order to get a fire truck across that span safely, we need to support the bridge in the middle. And those would be approximately 3-foot square pillars, one on each side of the bridge, and there may be two sets. So we've minimized the wetland buffer disturbance. We've avoided wetland disturbance entirely. There's another question has come up with regard to how we would pave it and what would happen with if a road was sanded or salted or something like that. The bridge reaches a low point just before it crosses. Yeah, that'd be good. Thank you. Sorry, I keep moving that around.
We're not union scale for stage crew.
So what the bridge comes off of Snake Hill Road and gradually goes down, crosses the stream, and hits another abutment. At the low point, we're going to put in. We're calling for catch basins, and I've forgotten the name to be perfectly honest with you, but I can provide you with a detail. A catch basin that captures the water. We're talking about a solid pavement with a curbing so that the water doesn't escape off the sides or plowed off the sides. And it would come down and go into this catch basin. The catch basin leads to basically it's kind of a rain garden. It's in a chamber though, and it has a tree in it, and it's got a mix of material in there that allows the grit and stuff that comes off the road to be washed through the catch basin into this chamber, and the water then settles through and gets filtered through and then gets let out. So we can capture it that way, and I wish I could remember the name. I'm sorry, I just don't. So that's what I think I can tell you about the bridge and why we did it, where we did it, how we're going to protect it, and why we can't practically use the other alternative places that have been suggested. And we also looked. So I'd be happy to answer anything about this if I'm able.
Questions?
How high is the curb?
Curb would be probably about a 6-inch curb. I mean, again, I don't know the design specifically, but we're not thinking about a wall or anything very high.
And as I mentioned, when we come back for a wetland permit and as part of the SWIP, those are details that we can hear you out on and take whatever steps you require to make sure we're doing it properly to your satisfaction. I think Glenn, when he mentioned the alternative driveway off of the lower part of Snake Hill Road, that the cut and fill that would be involved there, as Glenn mentioned, would be monumental, as would the retaining walls. I don't think I heard that phrase when he talked about it. Some of those retaining walls would be 20 feet high, I believe, the way Glenn designed it. So that alternative didn't work either. So the present Snake Hill Road entrance doesn't work, the lower Snake Hill Road doesn't work, and this is the one that works, and we'll engineer it properly and design it properly.
Put that up. Yep. This is one of the alternatives. This is actually the one that goes onto Philipsbrook Road. Now, this gray shading that you see is that's the required grading or that would be necessary in order to achieve a 10% grade. We could have gone to 12, and that may have worked, but this is what's the grade in the town code for a collector street. or Commercial Street, no, Collector Street. At any rate, so as you can see, there's, I think it's posted on here. There's 4.9 acres of disturbance. If we built retaining walls, and here you have each of those red stripes are retaining walls, anything on the side opposite the road from those retaining walls could, to some extent, be avoided, could be reduced in terms of the disturbance. But we would be talking about 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 or 7 lifts of about 6 feet each in retaining walls. So it's a massive construction project, and not to say anything about my desire not to go out on Philipsbrook Road.
Is the landscape all forested there currently?
Pardon me?
Is the landscape all forested there currently?
No, this is the road that goes down by the first fairway. It's the road that goes down right by the first fairway. So there is some disturbance, but it's not all disturbance. And if you take this last curve is where we bent it to get off of this aqueduct. And as you can see from the colored shading, it's a very steep area. So it's just not a practical alternative. And if there's objections to traffic, to be perfectly frank, if there's an objection to traffic on Snake Hill Road, I gotta know there's a objection to traffic on Philipsbrook that's going to be much louder and I think much more justified.
Phillipsburg Road there is only a 1.5 lane road.
Right,
too.
and when we pave it and regrade it, it'll be nice and 24 feet wide.
Stop.
But I told the town that pays only $65 a month, it's not worth it.
So I have a question. I'm assuming we have a public space. You need an alternative, or we'll call it alternative/emergency access. True? This is not made.
Well,
Most people, visitors that are coming in, will be using the Route 9 entrance.
No, I don't know the answer. That's been figured out, but I don't know
Because
what
that,
those things
that, in my mind, other board members might agree with me, that sort of weighs on me heavily in terms of, the engineering you're suggesting certainly can work, but it's a lot of engineering, and it's for, alternative access.
I don't know that it's for alternative access. I mean, there's people that are coming across the bridge. The one place that we had difficulty with the traffic report that I know of, and where we had to make a mitigated measure was down at the intersection of Snake Hill Road and Route 9D, where the intersection was going to fail if you ran I guess a wedding and a theatrical performance in each of the 2 theaters. And that's in fact one of the main reasons why the second theater was given up. So there is traffic down there that would be a problem. And I think it's safe to presume that the exiting traffic the entry and exiting traffic would use that bridge.
It's not limited to emergency situations only.
Well, today, right now, with the golf course, when they're doing when the golf course was running,
Right.
and when they were doing weddings, there were times, or other affairs, there could be substantial traffic at times. Did anybody ever try to at least roughly study egress from the different?
More than roughly.
Well, more than roughly.
Okay.
It's thoroughly studied. The traffic reports have been refined and refined and refined to satisfy AKRF's questions and those of the planning board for that very thing. The total number of occupants or humans on site at one time, total number of vehicles on site at one time, people leaving in staggered fashion or not.
That's not what I'm asking. I'm asking historic, when it was running as a golf club and a catering facility.
Yeah, well, we use those as points of reference
Okay.
between existing and proposed. Yes, sir. They're in the traffic reports that are part of the EAF.
What's the fate of the road across the dam now, or the dam itself is?
Well, the dam is being handled as a separate matter with the DEC. Another engineering firm has been, Tectonic has been hired to study it and to provide a remedy at that. At this point, I understand there's a temporary reduction in the level of the water just for safety purposes. So the idea, as I understand it, is that it will be out of service as a road. It will be cleaned up and whatever repair gets done, but it will remain there and just be, maybe there'll be some pedestrian access, but there will be no vehicular access.
There'll be a path and landscaping, but no vehicular.
But it'll function as a dam still? It'll function as a dam in the future?
Well, the dam's not going to be removed, no.
Okay.
Right, there's no plan to remove the dam.
I was just thinking about maybe potentially a way to incorporate that into the overall meadow restoration or restoration plan in the future. It looks like you may have thinking that way.
That's been taken into consideration a bit already.
Okay.
There's planting around the pond and in the area where the roadway over the dam exists presently.
Okay.
That's in the submission.
So we don't know the condition of the dam at this point.
We know it needs to be repaired. We do
Right,
know
but
it's.
that's sort of a broad term.
Right, yeah, no, we don't, yeah, I don't personally,
But the repair or maintenance of the dam is not part of the project or a proposal in front of any of the boards. It's a separate matter directly.
No,
reviewed.
I understand that, because I know at the planning board, it was brought up, you know, I guess there was one planning board member that was uncomfortable with building a bridge that would be within the pathway of a dam that needs work.
But you're awaiting a response from DEC. Is that true? Okay.
Yeah.
But in the interim, the level was lowered as a safety measure. So, you know, when a heavy storm like we had
Right.
recent months, you know, the dam is viewed by Tectonic and by the DEC to be able to, pardon the expression, weather that kind of a storm.
Okay. Other questions?
So the alternatives were the dam and this was another presented alternative?
Well, you have up
Yeah,
there.
what you have there.
this is one alternative that was presented. The other one was to work our way down to the existing entries at the maintenance one, the ones that cross over the aqueduct within a right-of-way.
Right.
And we could do it, but it's.
Why don't you show it to us in case anybody on the
No,
board
no,
hasn't
We
seen it?
may not have brought that one, but there are two problems.
It's in the pack. I
It's
just
in the
don't know if
package,
anybody
yeah.
looked at
But
it.
it's the
I've seen
The
it.
problem with that is twofold. That not only the same grading issue and the same retaining wall issue exists, the second issue is the aqueduct itself in that area is not buried that deeply. And to have heavy traffic go over that aqueduct would cause compression that could be hazardous to the aqueduct itself. So that was ruled out because of that. I forget that term of that type of aqueduct, Glenn?
Oh, that's a cut and cover.
Cut and cover, yeah.
And DEP probably would not have.
They would probably not be happy to have that
Amenable to
happen,
that. Yeah.
nor would the people on the other end of the tap.
This decision wasn't made lightly. You know, it was really thought out among the professionals, with the client. Regular people don't build bridges. I mean, they're expensive, but it's really the only practical way to get out of there and preserve preserve a lot of the undisturbed area.
And better the sight lines for that that level of ingress and egress off Snake Hill Road.
Dan, can I check in for a second about the dam?
Yeah.
Hi, Alex, I'm project manager for the project. I want to correct a statement that was made that the condition of the dam is unknown. That's not correct. The Garrison has been in contact with the DEC. There's been an initial site visit made, many correspondences. We can get you copies of that, but it's not an unknown question. What state the dam is in.
But nobody's looked at an alternative of modernizing the dam and using that as egress, as an alternate.
No,
It's the
and
sight
because of the
line.
site distance, that we can't do anything about the site distance at that point.
It's a bad turn. It's a bad turn right there.
bad turn.
That's by the
Very-
church. Yeah.
That's right, it's very,
When I use it myself, the go down Snake Hill Road from there, you really have to sneak out before you can make the right-hand turn even, let alone the left-hand turn. So right now, it's not really a two-lane road there, and to convert that into a two-lane road, if it were possible, would make that even less safe at that point of entry.
It's not a subjective term, it's something that's been studied.
You've got more work with the stream for that solution, right, that option.
The existing main entrance, there's no way to just make that wider, you know, just put some investment into the existing entrance and forego an entrance on Snake Hill?
Not to forego it, but we are making it wider, we are making improvements there, turning lanes and approach lanes, and it will be wider. So there is a complete plan on that, but it's not not the only thing we can have to do. We have to have a way out too.
So it is a secondary egress that's required then?
They're co-equal, they're both
They're-
primary.
They're both primary.
Both
yeah.
primary, okay. Mhm.
Any next topic or anything more on this one?
I think maybe in the future, and I know that started out the presentation this way, but just maybe more discussion on why this bridge design is the best possible design. And, you know, and then maybe even presenting alternatives that would be terrible designs that we could compare them to as well.
When we come back for the permit?
Yeah.
Sure, by then we'll have more design drawings for sure. Right now it's visual as opposed to technical.
I think right now we saw some pretty terrible alternate access points. When I look at Phillips Brook Road, I shiver. Yeah. So we're done with the bridge?
Yep.
What would you like to talk about?
And sighting?
I'll start out with that and turn it over to Glenn a little bit. If you had the opportunity to watch the planning board meeting, May planning board meeting, Christopher Davis was present and spoke quite eloquently and comprehensively as to the reasons for the location. And, you know, without in any way trying to be limiting in what you want to ask about it, you know, the area is not in any area that is subject to Conservation Board jurisdiction for permitting purposes. It's outside of the, the scenic highway area. It's not in the scenic protection overlay area. So where it's sited doesn't require any permit specific to the siting. It's a site plan issue and a secret issue, but it's not anything that requires a separate permit because of the siting. That's number one. Number two is the Storm King doctrine, which is very important because the visual impacts of the tent are from the inside, not from the inside looking out, but from the outside looking in, meaning the other side of the river. And also, if you look at the planting plans, exhibits 40 and then 46 to 50, the way with adjacent, from the adjacent roadways, the plantings that already exist and the proposed plantings, I couldn't find, I myself, which is not a skill set that I have, I couldn't identify where the tent was in those pictures, but the tent is there. That's just my own shortcoming. It doesn't mean it's impossible to see, but the tent is hard to spot in those pictures. With the current vegetation and with the anticipated planting that will go in there as well.
Let me go backwards for a moment. Since you're quoting the Storm King doctrine, you want to explain it to the board very concisely?
The Storm King doctrine arose out of, from my experience, just as I said, the concern that people had at the time about the impacts of viewing the beautiful Hudson River Valley. And the point of the matter is that I'm not an expert on it. I do have some cases, though, that talk about secret negative declarations as a result of steps to mitigate any impacts visually of a proposed project. I can talk about that more coherently than I can about the Storm King doctrine. But the fundamental point is that the Storm King doctrine is from the view outside looking in, not inside looking out. That's important because this is private property. It's private property now. It'll be private property when we get an approval, good Lord willing. So this is our property, our client's property, from which the site, they will look out. The people looking from the outside in, whether they're driving on the roadways or looking at it from across the river, it will be very hard to see. The visual locations that were chosen by AKRF are shown in the EAF that demonstrate how minuscule the site is in those photographs as a version of what it will look like when constructed. But the cases say that if there's sufficient mitigation by the planting, existing vegetation, and topography, which we've done here, as the exhibits 40 and 46 through 50 show, then you've done your job from a secret point of view. Again, we'll be back for site plan approval from the planning board on this, and I'm sure there'll be further discussions about mitigation measures.
Questions or comments?
I don't think this is in our purview.
No,
personally.
but the planning board has asked us.
Well,
What-
it's
to weigh
like,
in.
but let me, if I could, just be respectfully be clear on a point. While you can comment in a general sense, when you're outside of your jurisdictional powers, you're speaking as a regular citizen. You know, you don't have the same imprimatur that you would have if you were speaking about wetlands or wetland buffers. So, I mean, that's just an important point. It'd be like me speaking about medicine. I know enough to be dangerous, having been on a hospital board, but I certainly can't have a professional opinion.
Understood, but they've asked us, you know.
I'm not disagreeing, but I'm just.
Because, you know, the question comes up, why, I guess the 10th is the 17th green? I'm not great with golf. You know, the question has come up over time when the original overlay districts were beginning to put together. Why was that not included? Because in the I think it was from 2009 or 2010, the comprehensive plan specifically mentions that ridge. In my mind, it wasn't included because it was an altered landscape, you know.
Yeah,
rather
it
than
was not in its natural.
I don't know. My comment on the what you've done with the siting is from Route 9, it shows it very, you know, it's hidden very well. From distant views, meaning from the west side, predominantly from the west side of the Hudson, or very distant from the east side of the Hudson that we're on, you don't see much of the tent. But within this analysis, this is my thought, what I'm not seeing is mid-views from a lot of the closer ridges. What does it look like from Fort Defiance? What does it look like from some of the other hills? I think the tent's going to be very visible. And
Well, there's some pictures in there from other locations close
Right.
by. They're in there.
yeah, but
North Redoubt.
yeah, I
Side
mean
by
that's just my thought. That's just, I don't know how the rest of the board feels on that.
Here's a mid-view, North Redoubt.
There are some, but
Yeah.
it's, that's just my thought on it.
Yeah, I guess my question is, what is your definition of not a viewshed impairment when you label it on the exhibits, just out of curiosity? Sorry? On the exhibits here, like the North Redoubt Trail, it says partially visible, not a viewshed impairment.
That's the conclusion of the landscape architect.
Right.
Yeah.
So I'm just curious what the legal definition of, like, what does that?
Well, there's no legal, that's not a legal definition that's on there. That's that's a landscape architect's view. What the case in WEOK versus the town of Lloyd says is that visual impacts need to be minimized to the extent practicable, and that's what we've done. That's the standard, you know, and the standard is from outside looking in, no. from inside looking out.
Yeah, no, I was just curious.
I don't understand the question or the point of it. I'm sorry, I'm being a little dense, but
No. I'm just curious how, how you're qualifying a not a view shed impairment when you label it.
Well, I can give you some,
Because there's only a couple exhibits that you show in here that are labeled that way. I'm just curious, and, I mean, some of these are obvious. It doesn't look visible at all, the area.
I mean, from any angle, you could always find a way to block it with a tree or something when you're standing there taking a picture. I don't know if this even provide any value.
we provided the views from the sites that AKRF told us to. That's the part I can tell you.
Right. Well, I'm just saying, I could walk anywhere around here and I could find a tree to block my camera and put the arrow right where the tree is. I mean, I don't know if it really means anything.
When Fenway Park sells tickets on the internet, they don't show you the sites from behind the poles in right field. That's.
I can tell you the document that Laney used when we discussed this in the office was the DPC has visual resource guidelines for evaluating visual impacts of their projects on historic and natural resources.
So that's where
It's available online.
and that's where they came from.
And that's where those references came from, because she said she used that document as a way
Thank you.
to navigate into the visual research determination of whether or not it was right.
Do you remember any of those?
Operational definitions.
Yeah.
You'd have to look it up, but there is a kind of a roughly based formula that they use in order to be able to determine whether something has.
So it's a scale of, is it a scale ultimately that you produce at the end that says not a view shed impairment?
I think it's a percentage of view that's obscured, but, so.
Well, so I'm just curious what the acceptable amount is, I guess, in their definition, do you know?
No, not off the top of my head, you have to look at that document.
Okay.
But Max, at the North Redoubt Trail, I just happen to know this because when we were dealing with the parking lot at the base and working with parks on it, this North Redoubt Trail view is considered like a keyhole view, and Parks maintains that keyhole view so that people have it. I mean, otherwise there would be no view at all, right? So I think that for this, maybe the tent is outside the keyhole view. That's what I'm getting when I look at this.
Well, and then for secret too, as you probably know, Mr. Garfinkel, it's from publicly accessible locations, not from private property.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I was just curious. It's a little bit outside of my, realm of understanding in terms of how to establish, just the view shed definition, so I was just, yeah.
Any other comments, questions? Let's move to Meadows. And
We can talk about that a little bit. When you want to talk about the meadow, what I'll talk to you about is to alert you to certain sections, although you all seem to be pretty good about knowing where things are in the EAF from my observation. Exhibit 28 shows plants that would be appropriate for use in the new meadow area, just for point of reference for you.
This Codger team is reaching its weakest point right now, talking about the meadows. But essentially, the plan is to, these darker green areas will be replanted and with native species to bring the grounds back to the way that they originally were, or at least some semblance of that. It's sort of, I know you're going to lead into the SWIP, but we'll have a program that will limit the amount of acreage that will be disturbed at any one time. We have a program in the in the facility that will look at the soils and replace them if necessary. We're not particularly for taking out a green. We know some of the greens have to be rehabilitated. So that's in part of the program, but all being done within the confines of the SWIP, all be limited in terms of the area. It will be managed with erosion control measures around it. There's a list of species that will be chosen, and way out of my league here, but based on proximity to wetlands, the wet and dry soils. That lady that was here before, we basically, remember what she said? That's what we'll do. I mean, that's basically what it boils down to. But we have provided that list of plants. We have identified those areas. And it's necessary in order to accomplish that goal. And I don't have an awful lot to say. If you have something you'd like to add, I'd love to have you do it. But
sure. So what we have in the document is a list of plantings. Sorry, Hallie Markson, I'm a landscape designer with Hudson River Waltz. And what we have provided is a list of a diagram showing the wetland area around the bridge and a list of representative species for each of the zones of planting in the wetland area and the buffer, mostly in the buffer, of course. And then a lot of those species are also representative, native, and regionally appropriate adaptive species that would also be used in meadow planting. Great, yeah, so this is just showing the zone of the wetland, a typical wetland planting, species that fall into different heights depending on how wet they like their feet to be. And then, you can extrapolate from that the plants that we would, for example, use in the meadows based on those upland zones. It's not an exhaustive list. It's just a list of representative species. They have not been designed to date, to a very high level, right? But we would come back and work with you at that time to design those.
And as I mentioned, the generalized list of the plants are on Exhibit 28.
And if you have any questions, I'd be happy to share what I know.
I know, Gareth, that you will maintain the meadows, but it's no easy trick to maintain the meadows. But being that it'll look terrible if you don't maintain the meadows, I'm sure you'll be able to do it, but I'd be curious to hear how you intend to maintain them as meadows.
Well, you have retained, Hudson Valley Shakespeare has retained a landscape manager. Oh, right here. Hi. Would you like to come up and speak a little bit, or we could just say that, we have a plan to maintain the meadows, and that will be further developed also as the site design gets developed.
I think that was our point about including that in the memo.
Yeah, I mean, that's where, the planning board had asked us to comment on that. Reforestation is simple compared to maintaining meadows in this part of the world, particularly when you already have a huge amount of, I'm going to use non-natives rather than invasives, because the golf course, which is a vast amount of it, was manicured, and the non-native grasses were there on purpose. But I had driven over there on Sunday to take a look, and I guess about 10 years back, they planted certain areas, I think with the intent of being native gardens. I mean, some of them are pretty big. I think one is exceeding an acre. And from the distance, they look great. But unfortunately, they're being overtaken by things like mugwort and oriental bittersweet and some others. So I guess what we were hoping to hear is the beginnings of an idea. And again, it's very much like we were talking to this small application for a homeowner, turning this into native meadows, which is part of how this project was proposed to everybody. It's a big deal. I mean, anything's doable, but it's a big deal, and it requires a plan and a long-term plan. And I guess, Max and I had discussed it, and we're just not seeing anything, and we thought there would be information, because it's as important as something like the alternate egress in the bridge, because it's a huge amount of the site.
The point of the secret is we've identified that environmental impact, right? And we have told you that we will present a plan, both a planting plan and a management plan when we come back for permitting from you. And just as you did with the first application tonight, with the Pierce property, we'll go through that and provide you with the nuts and bolts of that plan. Right now, that's premature and not really part of the secret process. The secret process is identification, coming up with a mitigation plan. The final plan itself is not required for a secret determination, and I can give you whether it's the Riverkeeper versus the town of Southeast, which went to the Court of Appeals, which my firm and I were involved with. We can talk about how the highest courts in the state say you don't have to come up with a final definitive plan for each and every aspect of the development in order to have a secret determination, positive deck or neg deck, either way. You just have to identify and present a commitment to mitigation and a generalized overall view of how you're going to accomplish it. That's what the cases say. And that's what we're going to do. And when we come back to you, we fully acknowledge we're not trying to avoid your board. We'll be in the same position that case number 1 was tonight, where there'll be a rigorous discussion of what the plan will be, and your input and your jurisdiction will come into play.
Currently, in this case, do you have a sense of timeline, as it coincides with development of the parcel, enacting that plan?
The timeline for the planting plan?
Yeah, will it coincide? I guess my question is, will it, all things, equal, if you break ground, will the meadow restoration be tackled, parallel to the development of the parcel, or follow, shortly afterwards? Or
Depends on how much disturbance remains during the construction process for openers, and then if Hallie knows the answer to that, I don't know, because that's hard to chart right now, because we don't know when we'll get the approval to start, what seasonally, whether it would be a good time to start that,
sure,
or how much land will be disturbed and remain disturbed before we can embark upon the restoration plan.
Yeah, I just remember last time you all presented, there was this 20-year perspective plan. Are we talking about year 15 we're starting this?
No, that it will be in the first phase, obviously.
And commitments carried throughout all of the phases?
Well, I think when we come back, I think what we can talk about is how we're phasing it and in the actual development. For example, the artist housing is not part of phase 1, down in the lower part. So whatever restoration efforts have to be undertaken in that area will be a future discussion with future consideration and future requirements for giving you a level of comfort and security. But the area around the tent, the box office, the rehearsal area, the back of house, etc., that's the area we're talking about. And that will be as soon as possible after it's possible to start the restoration.
And sorry, Andrew.
I was just going to say, but keep in mind that that highly managed golf course is going to literally go to seed.
Well, except that we're taking care of it already, in that it doesn't look as bad. I live in Somers, and a golf course nearby was abandoned by the operator, and it did go to seed. And Heritage Hills, the community bought that 9-hole golf course from the operator, and then they just mow it now, just field mow, not manicured mow. And it did look bad, but if you go to the Garrison right now, even now, the fairways, et cetera, looking far more presentable than if they had just gone to seed.
I think that's an important aspect that we'll probably ask you to talk about as you phase in any, meadow making in disturbed areas, that the essence of management of the existing areas that have not been touched yet will need to I think we're going to want to see some sort of a calendar of how they'll be managed while they're on deck to be remeadowed.
Sure, Ms. Morrison and Ms. McKinnon will have that plan in place for you.
We're going to keep you busy.
Yeah.
So is the idea to apply for a single wetland permit from us for the whole project, or is there going to be individual phases that have different permits?
The permit we'll be applying for is just the first phase, right? The secret covers the whole project But the phase one is, we don't need a wetland permit for something we're going to do in 5 to 7 years.
Well, you might.
We might, not now,
Right.
but now, I'm sorry, we don't need that now, right? Because things can change. Wetlands can change course. Something that was a wetland can not be a wetland anymore or become a wetland according to the way they're defined. We've seen that.
I think you bring up an excellent point, though, because we may want to have a separate wetland permit for the bridge and a separate wetland permit for the meadow restoration project and,
And the actors'
consets.
housing in 5 years or whatever.
Right,
is
yeah,
what-
right. I mean, that stuff I wouldn't even touch at this point,
You're
but
just
if
talking
about- No,
the
that's- I mean-
re-meadowing is starting, I think we do want to see a longer-term look at that. Like, want to see the 10,000-foot view, but, it may need to be a phased permit for each segment as you design them.
That makes sense. And to have separate ones makes sense as well. There's different areas, different needs.
Do you agree? Does that make sense? I mean, I
Yeah.
don't want to.
Yeah, I mean, what-
This can't be a broad brush.
No, what we're looking at right now is, the planning board has asked us a few specific things. So really, and what you presented is great, it helps us. And then I'm going to ask everybody, is there anything else that you're interested in about the project that has to do with the environment? Is essentially, we need to get back to the planning board. Do we feel that, just going, has alternate, is what's being proposed mitigating to all ways that's practical, or should there have been other alternatives asked? Period. It's really as simple as that. And we're not even, if we say we want alternatives, at this point in time, it's not for us to say what the alternative should be. That's all they're really asking us, for a very narrow scope. And CEQA right now is very narrow. What they're looking at is whether they want to make a positive or negative declaration, period. And we're a tiny, tiny piece of that.
You want to hear anything about the water budget?
Yeah, and as I said, we put, just so we're on record, we had put SHWIP on, but I think we're too premature really to speak about it. I think Max and I were interested because it was a large part of the application for something that really hasn't been planned yet, but I think that's going to be a work in progress. And as you had said, it's going to flow into as we say, flow into a lot of things in terms of,
We're here all week, right?
In terms of.
But I think the water
wetlands.
budget actually
Yeah,
is
but
a good thing
I
for this
think
board.
water budget
yeah.
is worth speaking, because
Yeah.
I know that the planning board is very concerned about the water, and in their minds, it's the aquifer and water budget. Well, we're on the whole more thinking about preserving wetlands, water courses,
And the
buffers.
SWIP.
Yeah.
But Mr. Waddell is here to speak about it. We have a graphic that I think that's very important that compares the 2005 present usage and projected usages.
One more thing on the restoration plan
Yes.
before we switch topics. Do you have a mission statement, an overarching, goal statement for the plan that you're presenting as part of the secret documents? Is there some direction that you're headed other than just meadow restoration? Do you have a larger perspective kind of?
Well, yes, meadows try to make it as natural as possible with native and regionally appropriate plants, whatever that might be, whether it's, meadows or plantings. And the plan will be developed in due course.
Do you have intentions to incorporate wildlife benefits? Scaling the project is, fairly large.
Wildlife benefits?
Yeah, so creating native habitats that'll impact.
I will say that is intrinsic, not just on this project, but throughout our whole firm's work. We're committed to, try and create the best wildlife habitat, create ecosystem services through the use of regionally appropriate native and adaptive plants, right? So we want to have plants that are going to support pollinators and birds. I know that that's an issue that is meaningful to you, Scott. As well as local wildlife. And we understand also that there are great pressures from deer and grazing on the property, as well as the constant threat of invasives that plague this whole region and beyond. And they are very difficult, and we are going to work with you and work hard to try and address those.
Have any of those been identified? Have any of those resources been identified that you're going to be targeting, or is that something that you're just committed to doing in the future?
Yeah, I don't have anything that I would mention right now specifically targeted to. It's a very broad statement, hard to pull something out specifically, but if you want to have a follow-up conversation, as I'm sure we will have, we can certainly drill down and talk about what those are.
The EAF documentation documents extensively, like biological resources and the different zones and what we're doing to protect them and what's there and how that will be impacted by our plans. Like that's extensively documented.
No, I understand. This restoration plan, in my opinion, should be targeted towards specific wildlife benefits, natural flora, like improving the native flora, maintaining that habitat type. Some of those things are outside the scope of what's detailed at that level in the secret documents in terms of natural resources.
The report that was submitted with the EAF, the opinion of the biologist in Kentucky facility said it was a major improvement in several areas.
Right. And additionally, the area that we're working in, by and large, is the existing golf course, turf golf course, right? So it is the least ecological value currently, and we're confident that we will be adding great value to the landscape.
We've had that discussion at this huge potential.
The Audubon Society met with NBW on May 4th, and they were pleased with what we have in mind, just as an add-on. Water budget? We have that, what if I don't have the big one? All right.
We can turn.
Yeah, all right. I'll sit down.
Yeah, take a break. In future, yeah. Is it? No.
Good evening. Ooh. Paul Waddell, Geodesign. Good evening. So I am an environmental consultant and hydrogeologist working on behalf of the applicant. I don't know if you want to ask me questions about the water budget specifically. I'd ask you perhaps to turn to exhibits 29B, 29C in your packet. So 29B is a graphic illustration of potable water demand. Yes. Okay. All right, so this, in my packet, this is 29B, and then adjacent to that is 29C that should look like this.
Calculated groundwater.
Yep.
Basin.
So just kind of give you a brief rundown. So 29B, potable water demand comparison. What this is a graphic representation of water demand under three different conditions. On the far left, in kind of a purple color, is the 2005 as of right projected demand for the PDD in 2005, which was approved by the planning board. In the center, in kind of a gold color, is the existing water demand under the golf course condition. That's estimated at 9,820 gallons per day. And on the far right is the projected Hudson Valley Shakespeare Festival demand. And you can see three different kind of tiers on the far right-hand column. And essentially, it is the lowest tier of 5,203 gallons per day is sort of the existing condition of the site under HVSF management. The existing condition under the golf course management is different from the existing condition that would exist under HVSF before any kind of development is performed there. And then you have a phase 1 and a phase 2 build out. And inside these boxes, obviously, are labeled the different amenities and uses for groundwater, for potable water, for a total under complete build-out of 13,353 gallons per day. So while there is an increase in projected demand after full build-out, compared to the existing condition under the golf course, the Phase 1 build-out is less than the existing condition, the demand, and the full build-out is less than the planning board approved 2005 as a right condition. And before I go on to the other graph, if you have any questions about this particular figure, I'd be happy to answer them.
So I have a question, and maybe I just don't understand this correctly, but it says maximum daily demand, so that's not, I mean.
These numbers are kind of like, I consider them a worst-case scenario, where every amenity, under whatever the condition is that's illustrated here, is kind of using water at the same time on the same day, and that's a good point that you raise, in that that's really a pretty rare condition, that all amenities will be, you know, utilizing water. That there'll be a banquet, there'll be a full restaurant, there'll be, you know, a theater performance, all going on at the same time. So, you know, but as necessary, we have to kind of come up with the peak demand, so to speak. But in general, and in most circumstances on a daily basis, the demand will not approach these numbers.
Thank you.
Yeah. You want to go to the next graph? So this is hopefully a little simpler to conceptualize. So, you know, as part of seeker, we're required to perform a water budget analysis, a water balance, I like to call it, you know, and essentially what that is supply and demand. And the first illustration that we just looked at is demand. In this graph, and we're looking at the one with the tall blue column on the far left, is supply. And in the case of groundwater, potable water, supply is the recharge to the groundwater aquifer, the recharge to the bedrock from which potable water was withdrawn. Now, conveniently, the town of Philipstown, in its zoning ordinance, provides a professional like myself with the means to do these calculations. It's actually in the zoning ordinance, and it's kind of quoted in the lower right-hand corner here. But what the zoning ordinance does is it allows the calculation of the recharge to the aquifer based on soil conditions, based on the overall acreage of all the different soil conditions that would exist in the recharge basin, and, you know, precipitation events. So, you know, what we came up with on the far left, first what we did was we determined based on hydrogeologic principles that the recharge to the groundwater aquifer is not just the Hudson Valley Shakespeare Festival property, but it extends through a wider basin, and in this case extends to the east side of Route 9. The rationale for that being that a groundwater recharge basin somewhat mimics surface topography. You know, groundwater flows in the direction of a gradient, and that gradient, for all intents and purposes, mimics topographic gradients as well. So when you have a topographic divide, you have not only a superficial water drainage divide into another basin, but the same is true in general of groundwater. So what we did was we delineated the recharge basin that includes the HVSF parcel, but also includes acreage to the east of Route 9, applied the zoning ordinance calculation methodology. We also, and so we came up with a number at the top of this column of 334, let's say, rounding up, gallons per day of total annual recharge for the basin plus the HVSF parcel. That's gallons per day because numerically it's kind of easier to work with that number than acre feet or things like that. Yeah, 334,000 gallons per day. It's labeled at the top of this tallest blue column. Do you have?
No, we don't have that.
In fact, we have a number of 100.
Okay.
Yeah, we're looking at calculated groundwater basin recharge and portable water demand comparison.
Correct.
And we're seeing...
the top of your column is at 199,449?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay. I apologize. You have a slightly earlier version of this graph. So what you're looking at is, let me try to summarize quickly. The total recharge of the basin was calculated at 334,000 gallons per day. We then estimated the consumption of all the existing homes within that basin. And that calculated out to be 134,000 gallons per day. This was subtracted out from the total, and we ended up with the available water to the HVSF parcel. And that's what you're looking at, of 199,449, okay?
This is the water that is available to the parcel in question.
That's the recharge of the entire basin, taking out what's already being used by the existing homes in the basin. So what's left is available to HVSF, okay? And then the idea here is just to show graphically how dramatically different the full bailed-out maximum demand, this little tiny green rectangle of 13,353 is what's been estimated for the full bailed-out demand. Now, what gets a little confusing, and I'll try to explain quickly, is that the center rectangle, the zoning ordinance requires that the demand calculated for the parcel be multiplied by 6 in order to do this balance, this comparison between supply and demand. The reason for that I can go into if you want to know. But the point is that even after you multiply the demand by 6, we're still significantly lower than the recharge available for withdrawal. So in a nutshell, supply is greatly exceeding demand, even under the proposed condition. Thank you. Any questions on that? Thank you.
What kind of plus and minus are around these numbers? Obviously, they're calculated numbers, so obviously there's some variance around it. I mean,
there is. I mean, you know, it's sort of you know, the zoning ordinance. There's pluses and minuses in every variable in the calculation, right? I mean, there's first of all, you start with different soil types, and the soil types come from the Soil Conservation Service, right? So their mapping could be somewhat variable. You know, every step of the process, there are tiny assumptions. They can either add up cumulatively or they could cancel each other out. Ultimately, there's such a disparity between supply and demand based on the calculation methodology we're provided that I think even variability in each one of those by percentage points would not result in a significantly different conclusion.
The times 6 thing is sort of the mitigating factor for the variation.
It actually, the purpose for the times 6 portion of the calculation is, the intent is that it leaves groundwater in the aquifer to dilute the nitrogen loading from the septic systems. The assumption is that if 1,000 gallons comes out of a well, goes into a house or any kind of a living facility, 1,000 gallons then goes into the septic system with the associated nitrogen loading. And the idea is that if you multiply by 6, the assumption is that you have enough groundwater left in the aquifer to dilute the nitrogen loading to 50% of the state standard. So it's a very conservative number. Thank you.
Would you like to hear about the SWIP, or have you heard enough?
Could hear a little bit. Why not? Why not? We're here. We like Glenn.
Well, I touched on a couple of things about the SWIP, and what needs to be understood here is Dan's kind of said it and hinted at it and talked about it a little bit, is that the SWIP is a preliminary document. What we did was, this is, I don't know, I'm going to say that's 100 pages. They're printed on both sides. What's in the SWIP is what we were told to put in the SWIP. It does not contain, it's about a third of the document, and it's the narrative that explains it. It doesn't contain the other 2/3, which are in the town hall, and Mr. Gaynor has a copy that were needed for him to be satisfied. But what we did was, We did some field testing to know that we have some ground that will absorb water. We need it for the septic system, we need it for the stormwater management. And we had successful tests. We have so much land and relative to the disturbance and what we have to deal with is that we were confident going into the calculations that we wouldn't have a problem with doing the SWIP later on. But Mr. Gaynor insisted that we actually develop a SWIP, and we did. We developed a SWIP showing how we were going to collect it, what we were going to do to mitigate it, the use of porous pavement on those roads that are flat enough to deal with porous pavement, the use of rain gardens, the use of the existing system, which was originally sized to handle the 40-room hotel in the 2005 plan, and that system is in place, and so that's got excess capacity. So the reasons that we resisted doing it is it's an awful lot of work. We did all of the calculations, we did all of the basins, but they're all going to change because the road's going to move over. The road has moved over recently in the most recent plan. So the bottom line is we did satisfy Mr. Gaynor in terms of his review. You will see if you look at this September, I think it's 21st AKR for Gaynor report, where he actually states that it's not to be considered final at this point, but it is considered, but it's necessary to do such a thing in his view to prove that, and we did. We did it with the testing, we did it with the, and so we have to, if I can remember my coaching on this thing, we have to treat the water quality volume. That's what used to be called the first flush. That means you capture the water that carries the grit and carries the sand, like I mentioned on the bridge before. We have to, there doesn't have to be a reduction in the amount of water. The increase in the water that flows off the site under some circumstances has to be reduced, and I don't think it has to be reduced here. And the other one is, that's the treatment, the water quality volume. So, and no, that was the first one, but the treatment overall. So I'm not real well versed in it, but I think that the comment that we were received that it was less than an adequate job would be probably valid if we were going to use it for the actual plan. But again, the plan, this is developing the plan much the way seeker is not expecting you to prove everything absolutely. It's expecting you to demonstrate. And frankly, the applicant's at risk if that doesn't work. They'll be back here with a reopening seeker. So there's significant work involved in the thing. It addresses all of the issues in terms of drainage, in terms of runoff, in terms of protecting the silt fences and other things to prevent erosion and sediment during the construction process. And there is a map in
the work product that you created and gave to Ron Gaynor, can Max get a copy of that as well? You aim to please. That's service, Glenn.
Also, for the record, I don't think anybody here said that it was inadequate. I think what we said or meant was that somewhat, we put it on the list because we wanted to know more about it, and we understood it's a moving target because the SWIP goes in with not just a preliminary site plan, it's as you're finalizing site plans.
Right, it's at the end of the process, and we've all paid telephone. That game telephone, you know?
Yeah.
Goes around 10 people and comes back a different story.
Does anybody on the board have any other questions in terms of any environmental aspects of the project?
On the lighting, I know I'm sure you're going to put that, in detail in future plans, but I know I've driven by certain big facilities, and sometimes the lighting is really obnoxious, you know, I mean, the lights are LED lights, they're not designed with consideration for someone, like you were pointing out before, from looking the outside in at this, you know? Especially like when all the cars start coming out and everyone's got different types of headlights. But I just ask that you think about that as part of the view shed, and that maybe strategically plants and things like that to block that, so that people that live in the area don't get lights, you know, like blasting through their windows and things like that, because I could really see that being a big issue for the residents.
And
Sally's coming. The plan is dark sky compliant, and we have, there are impression images in there, aren't there?
Yes.
Yeah, I saw the light sequences at certain times
So
going in
we've done
and
our
out.
best to model that, to give a suggestion of what the goals are, and we are aiming to be dark sky compliant. We're working with a site lighting designer who has her PhD in environmental psychology just on the side, but she is a very well-respected lighting designer and is helping us to achieve the minimal site lighting needed to be safe. We are planning, scheduling the lighting so that, for instance, if the site is not actively in use, you wouldn't have the parking lights on. For something like a parking lot, there are code requirements that regulate how bright that needs to be for safety, but when that's not needed, those will not be in use. And in terms of secondary site lighting, it's all being done with the lightest touch possible to keep the site safe, but being very, very respectful of the local community of both humans and animals. So.
Thanks, Sally.
I have a question that I keep getting asked, and I have no idea what the answer is. Maybe someone here can tell me. But the brown fairway that I see on the west side of Snake Hill Road, can someone explain why that is the way it is right now?
I would have to ask the entity that applied the insecticide or pesticide to start the restoration going, but I think that whatever it was.
It's a different property. It's what's in the land trust.
No, it's not.
I can't hear you.
It's Shakespeare.
It is Shakespeare. Okay.
Yeah. Or it's.
Yeah, it's Mr. Davis.
Oh, okay, but it was a test of herbicide or something? Is that what?
I think they were trying to kill off certain aspects of grass or let it remain fallow or become fallow to promote other growth. I don't know.
Okay.
I only saw it, not part of our project, so.
Okay, it would be good if someone had an answer to that at some point, because I keep getting asked.
Yeah.
I have no idea.
He's starting the restoration of a meadow on that project.
I see.
His property for his own private property.
Okay.
And it's been reseeded and hopefully it's gonna go already coming in.
Okay, all right, well, that's a valid answer.
Yeah.
Also, in the future, any herbicide applications, we would regulate if they're in a 100-foot setback from a water
Right.
course or a wetland.
Right, we didn't have any say in that, and it's not part of this project, but we know that, and we'll follow that direction, believe me, and that requirement.
That was my last question. It was really about, it was just
Sorry, I couldn't answer. Sorry, I couldn't.
curiosity that I get asked at Food Town and the dry cleaners and wherever I am,
Anybody else?
Thank you, sir.
No, thank you. Thank you, everybody, for coming
And we
in.
look forward to returning and filling in any of the blanks that we've left, which are appropriately blank at the time being. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks. Very thorough.
Yeah, I'm tired. We need to get back to the planning board, and their meeting is Thursday. So it's very simple. I'm going to ask the following question, and we do not need to have a consensus. I'm just going to count 1, 2, 3, 4. So essentially, and I'm going to use the exact wording from CEQA, which is the bridge, the plan that's there. Do you believe that it demonstrates that the action chosen is one that avoids or minimizes adverse environmental impacts, I can't talk anymore, to the maximum extent practicable. So all I really want to know from each one of you is, do you believe the siting avoids or minimizes adverse impacts? Or do you think that it doesn't, or do you think there should have been other alternatives? Don't need any more than that.
Specifically the siting?
No, the bridge itself, the enterprise of the bridge.
Well, we don't have a final bridge design, so clearly it's just the concept
It's
of
the
the bridge.
concept, it is,
And the location.
Everything within CEQA is a concept.
Right.
So,
I think that they did a good job looking at alternatives and coming up with, possibilities, but certainly there's probably a lot more work that could be done. So I wouldn't go one way or the other right now, but I think, I liked what I saw, that at least they're considering other opportunities.
okay.
Has it been, Andy?
Mm-hmm.
Has it been staked out?
Parts of it were staked out.
The bridge, the stake, mark?
A little bit. It was staked out a little bit when we looked at it, and
Yeah, but
it
it
was
wasn't tagged.
further staked out. I mean, it's not a million stakes, but it was further staked out, because it was in some of the photographs that were shared with the planning board. So, all right, I have a maybe.
Pardon?
Do you have comments on the bridge?
Not at this point, no.
I'm satisfied with the location selected for the bridge based on the other alternatives presented. I think it's the best option. I am interested in seeing what that final design is, as is, I'm sure, everyone.
Which is not part of the secret process.
Which is not part of the secret process, so.
I ask you to read the question one more time?
I want to use the exact wording. So the bridge, or maybe I should call it the alternate or the second egress, using the bridge as it is proposed now. Do you believe that the action chosen is one that avoids or minimizes adverse environmental impacts to the maximum extent practical?
As it was explained to us, yes.
And it's a tough one for me, but I'm going to go for the no. So we have 2 yeses, 1 maybe, and 1 no. That's okay, that's fine. We're going to be today quantitative. Okay, tent siting. Who wants to start?
I already said, I don't think that it's in our purview to, I know you said that we were asked to weigh in on this. I think the tent site is fine.
Okay.
I would say that maybe it's not technically our purview because of the way that it's not in the scenic overlay, but I think that might be a gap because it is such a beautiful location, and how could it not be in the scenic overlay? And it's
But it's
certainly...
not. It isn't, so we have to
Well-
go with what it is.
Right. Well, then, in my personal opinion, I'm not sure that that's the most has been done to mitigate that, in my personal opinion.
That's what I would say. The most hasn't been done.
I agree with that. That's a no.
And I agree with that. Okay. Meadow restoration is not fully in the proposal at this point, so I'm not sure it's, I mean, do you want to say a yes, maybe, or no, or not?
I think it's too important not to
Okay.
consider.
Then let's go for it.
It feels like a yes, no, or maybe is not the way that we can.
Yeah,
I mean,
I
can
think-
we do some sort of
Yes,
a narrative
we-
on this?
Or what
Because-
we can
because-
do is, maybe the best way to do it, because I want to make, the reason I would like to make this simple for the planning board is they're drowning in data,
Yeah.
right? And we also need, because I'm gonna have to do it, I need to get it out tonight or first thing tomorrow morning, because they have a meeting on Thursday. So why don't we say more of the nomenclature would be enough information, not enough information, or don't know? Does that work?
Can I jump in on that one?
Yeah, come on.
I think nomenclature is a booby trap, because I don't like any of those three, because two of the three are negative, and they're not fair, actually. Because I think you do have an idea of what our commitment is for the meadow, and to say, not enough, or at this time, we have been presented sufficient evidence that the applicant will embark upon a responsible meadow restoration plan during the wetlands permit process. That would be what I would think would be a favorable comment. That might be, is that a yes or a no? Let's not have multiple choice, or nomenclature that's sort of vague and indefinite. I didn't hear what the vote was. I have a hearing problem, so I didn't hear what you said about the tent. I didn't know what the outcome of that was. So if you could repeat that.
The tent was 1 yes and 4 no.
Okay.
With no. Okay,
Thank you.
I can, this is unusual.
Well, yeah,
in a sense, but
it's extra jurisdictional and unusual in that respect too. But that's what they asked you to do, so you're doing it.
So I think the nomenclature is, do we think there's sufficient evidence that they will develop a plan? Or I would rather the word evidence be intent, but
Does the record reflect sufficient documentation that they will embark upon a responsible restoration plan upon completion of the secret process?
So our vote is not to characterize whether it's an adequate plan, it's just whether or not they're going to embark on it.
It's the intent.
Intent, whether we feel.
Okay, I believe them.
So, should we go backwards?
Sure, I think that they've demonstrated an adequate intent.
I agree with Scott.
I agree.
Rob?
Yeah, I think that they put some thought into it.
Of course, when they present it, there's always an opportunity to say whether it's inadequate, but we're not talking about the intent, then we'd be talking about the details.
We haven't seen a plan yet.
Right.
No. So we'll have to weigh that on its merits.
Just wanted to make sure I'm clear on this.
I'm being a good soldier here, trying to understand how we can have a board that doesn't have a secret authority having a secret vote, but I'm along for the ride.
It's just recommendation.
I know, I understand.
It's recommendations,
I got it.
and we're an interested agency.
Well,
so that does count. So you won this when you have it unanimously. Okay?
Thank you. I'll stick around for the next one if I might.
Is that everything?
Yeah, while I'm here.
I don't think we can go. I don't think we can go through Schwip at this point. What does everybody think?
If we're talking about intent or evidence that they have,
then let's use.
If that's the case,
let's use it for Schwip. Then
Glenn just threw the plan at Max, so we know that it exists.
The cases talk about sufficient basis for a determination to be made. That's what the standard is, right? We all know that. And the case Merson versus McNally, which came out of this town, that went to the Court of Appeals in 1997, said that. I wasn't the lawyer for that, although I was a lawyer, I didn't have that one. But that going to that Merson case for a minute, are the reports sufficient for the planning board to reach a determination on their secret determination? So that's why I became a little hyperactive when we want is there sufficient record for the planning board to reach a conclusion on the different issues? I think that's the best way to phrase it. And you've done that with the last one. And I think, I don't want you to go backwards. So I think the question would be the same as we had for the meadow restoration. Is there sufficient documentation for the planning board to reach a decision one way or the other on the question of the stormwater pollution plan. So that was a specific item that they asked you to comment upon.
First.
Now, before we do that, since the SWIP is a very technical document, and I think Max and I are probably the only ones of us here that's read the excerpt of it, not the whole thing. We have two ways to go. One is we could vote on it. The other is we can just say we know it exists, but we don't really want to vote on it because we're not familiar with it enough. I can go either way. So let's decide on that first.
I wouldn't feel comfortable. I mean, it's a very technical process, and we haven't really even seen it, and it's premature, and as was presented, that it's really a proposal. It's just kind of a draft, really. I mean, it's, you know, I'm not sure that that's the SWIP that will be in place at the end, so I would defer till then.
Do you agree?
I agree.
I'm sorry to,
That's fine.
That's what we're here for. I don't understand, I mean, if the SWIP is not supposed to be created until they've got an actual site plan, right? Like a real, you know, it's supposed to be created after this process. So they've created a pre-document, a pre-SWIP, and we're being asked to decide whether that pre-document that doesn't need to be created for this process is good enough. It's a little bit weird.
Yes
Don't
and
you
no.
think?
I mean, I think we can basically say that there's no reason for us to comment on it because it's premature. It doesn't put it in a bad
Yeah,
light.
I think
mean,
that
that's
makes
what-
more sense
That's
because,
what
yeah.
I'm hearing from these two, and I agree with that too. I agree with that. Right?
So the planning board asked you to comment, right? They asked you for your comments. They didn't actually ask for a vote. And, you know, it's sort of a ersatz secret determination. And that's fine if that's the way you want to do it. But the SWIP is something that's analyzed by the town's engineer, right? So I shouldn't comment on it because I'm a lawyer. What do I know about a SWIP? Not much. I know what they do. I know their function, but I can't create one. I can't criticize one necessarily. I know when they're really deficient, but I don't know the nuances. And I think the question is there sufficient basis of the information before you to make a comment? I mean, the tent, that was a subjective decision you made. And that's your opinions, that's your personal opinions, but that's not based on your particular expertise. It's your opinion as people, because you categorize it as an environmental impact, personally. And, you know, it's prejudicial in my point of view, but you did it, that's fine. But the SWIP, I think, is even more important, that is there sufficient information upon which the town and its professional consultants can assist in making the determination under SECRA? I think that's the question. Okay.
We're saying we're not adequately.
We don't know.
We can't give them guidance in this regard because
I would
we
say-
just saw a black book that now Max has, but we haven't seen the contents of that black book, so.
But perhaps the proper answer is to defer that determination to the town engineer.
That's
or the
exactly what we're
DPW.
doing.
Right.
I mean,
That's
essentially,
exactly
we're
what we're
abstaining.
doing. We're abstaining from comment.
politely.
Oh, okay.
Right? Right. And yes, you know, a huge amount of the CEQA process is unfortunately subjective. As much as it wants to be objective, it is a subjective process.
Well,
you know,
when there's been a secret determination that's subjective,
no,
and it
not
goes
a
against me,
determination.
I usually win in court.
Not a
I
determination.
mean, always, nearly.
Not a
nearly,
determination.
always.
It's going through the different questions. Certain things are subjective, and certain things you can get hard data for.
Andy, can I make a comment?
Sure.
Question? I'll just call for a second.
Now, who's this gentleman?
I'm a town board member.
Oh, okay. Oh, right. Yeah, right. Thank you.
Nice to meet you. So Jason Angel, just the liaison to the Conservation Board from the Town Board. I just wanted to ask a question. It's just kind of verifying that and I had a conversation with Steve Gabba, because I was kind of doing my homework here, that the Conservation Board tonight is just weighing in. It is an agency of interest in this because the wetlands permit, and we are hearing different aspects of the Hudson Valley Shakespeare Festival plan that have environmental concerns, which is the purview of the Conservation Board. And the conversation we were just having was not about the SECRA declaration, which is the planning board. It was on the aspects of the plan that have an environmental impact that is the purview of the Conservation Board. Right? I just wanted to verify that, because that is what I will be bringing back to the town board, that this conversation was within the purview of the Conservation Board, because it's not about the secret declaration. It is about the aspects of the plan that have environmental impact, and that's the discussion I just heard.
Yes.
Okay.
Yep.
Okay.
And that is not unusual that the planning board will ask us to weigh in on something that they are lead agency on.
Yeah.
That does happen.
Look, everybody knows this is the largest project to come across any boards in Philipstown ever, right? Everybody's pretty agreeable on that point, and I understand that. And it's sort of uncharted territory in many ways, because it's never been this big. But everybody's doing the best they can but we all have to play within the lines and the rules of the game, which are the jurisdictional lines. So my job is to protect the interest of the client, so that's something that is voted on here, because I read the Harvard Lampoon ad every week, excuse me, that's a paid advertisement in the newspaper about too much, too big, whatever. So what is said, words have impacts. Not on the planning board. They're going to do their own thing. They've been at this for even longer than you have. They've analyzed all these documents thoroughly. AKRF, Ron Gaynor, Steve Gabba have. So, but words are important, and how we classify things are important. That there's a lot of misconceptions out in the public of those against this project, and I don't want the untimely or improper use of a word to fire a flame. So that's why I'm making some of these points. I'm not trying to be critical or in any way try to usurp any of your authority, but I'm just trying that we're all careful, and I think you've been trying to do that, and I appreciate that.
Point taken. So how do we want to proceed?
I'm going to make it very short.
Just a quick memo, then you'll generate it and send it to Neil Zuckerman.
Yep.
But I think,
and the chair.
continuous with this point, I think that it's important that we don't mistranslate our votes. That in fact that the meaning of what we've just done is that it was adequately presented as a point of concern, rather than we're not signing off on any plans or.
No, we're not. That's not our position.
Right. I just want to make sure that just like you're saying, a negative vote would work.
Yeah, like a no vote on the 10.
Somebody will pick it up.
We have presented.
A yes vote doesn't do the opposite, is my point.
For example, the 10. In my opinion, we have presented adequate mitigation measures in compliance with the law, the case law, the Storm King Doctrine, and SECRA, that we have mitigated or eliminated visual impacts according to the law. Some people may not like that, but that's what we did. All right, and a no vote means, well, you didn't do that in the eyes of some people. That's why that gives me a concern. So it's maybe more than you really.
I think, I don't want to be disrespectful, but I think you need to respect this board, okay? In the sense that this memo will go to Mr. Zuckerman. It will be part of the town record, subject to FOIL if somebody wanted it, and he will probably disseminate. I'm sure he'll disseminate it to the planning board members, but that's it.
Okay,
I mean,
fine. No,
that's it.
We're just having a conversation here, right?
I understand the applicants and everybody that works for them frustration for the ads and probably letters that have been in the paper. I understand both sides, and yes, some of what's been in there has probably been harsh and perhaps inappropriate. But it has nothing to do with the Conservation Board, the Planning Board. I think, we can't do anything about that, unfortunately.
And I want to read in a subsequent attempt at humor or information, that planning board flies in face of conservation board, grants, issues negative declaration for project. I mean, that's why this whole process is really flawed. But you've done it, and it's fine, and you're going to do your memo.
Well, let me tell you one thing historically about the Conservation Board in this town, which before that was a Conservation Committee, and before that was a Wetland Advisory Committee, because I've been on it for 26 years. What's very different about this board is we're not adversarial. I have been to a lot of training courses where there are members of planning boards, there are engineers, land planners, and people from different conservation boards. And on the whole, I cringe on a lot of the other members because they want to be argumentative. That's not what we do. What we've always tried to do is how do we make this the best for the town? I mean, I recently had a call from somebody who's a chair of a nearby town planning board that I had been to a course with some years back, probably about 7 years, so I was surprised to hear from her. And she was very upset that I had to get rid of one member and one of my town board had to remove somebody because they're always fighting what the planning board wants to do or the town board. That's not what we do. We are different in that way, and we want to work with everybody.
We look forward to working with you.
Okay.
Yeah, I have no problem with our interaction tonight. It's been very respectful, and I hope we've been informative as best we can be. But I just want to, it's important for me to do my job too, to just try to be precise where I think
You
we
were
need to
very,
be.
the presentations tonight were informative.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you. We appreciate you coming in. So we have Needleman.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, I didn't realize that you were here, and this would have probably would have taken you first to save a little time.
From Putnam Engineering.
Could you just move a little? Thank you.
And I'm here representing Mrs. Needleman. They have a failed septic system, so we are just looking to find a home for a new system, which we believe we have done in the southeastern corner of the property as best we could. The system, originally we had gotten approval for a conventional system, but we have since changed that after talking with the wetland inspector, and we've changed it to a peat system, and we actually got an approval on it today.
It's great news.
Yep. So do you have a plan for it?
This is the existing house down here. The existing fields were here. The wetland line where the house is right back in here.
Excuse me, sir, can you grab the microphone?
So the existing septic is located in this area right here, which is probably about 30 feet away from stone wall edge of wetland. The soils down in this area are very poor, and there wasn't any chance of finding anything in that area. So I did some perk tests, and we did some soil testing, and we just moved our way uphill, and we finally found this area up in here where we had a decent soil, and got perk tests and deep tests that met with the health department's approval, and that's where we're locating the septic system.
How far is that from the buffer?
Roughly 52 to 67 feet. And anywhere else I go, coming back down the hill, I get closer. So I'm as far away from the buffer, from the wetland as I can get.
Just got approved for a heat system.
Yeah, we got approval today. Well, originally it was a conventional system, but we did change it to a peat system.
Thank you. I just didn't hear it, sir.
Say it one more time. I mean, the board's okay moving forward with that system. It's a pretty constrained area. They're
We
following.
made this request, haven't we?
Yeah, we had asked, when we met, I suggested this request based on prior conversations with similar topics, obviously in similar situations, and they acted on it.
All right, then. This might be a record, but I'm going to ask for a motion to approve a permit for this system.
Just one thing, I'm having trouble finding it, but I thought that there was a mistake in the wetland, the permit application, where at one point, there was a question that said, does it fall in the wetland, and the answer was no, and then the next
There was a
question-
what in the wetland?
There was an inconsistency in the
here?
application, I thought. I can't find it in my notes, I'm sorry, right there. If you have. I just thought it should be at least noted. I'm having trouble finding it.
This is the application.
Let me take a quick look.
Interpreting as in the wetland versus in the buffer.
That's what I want. Sorry about ruining our record.
Critical environmental area?
Does it say that the proposed action?
That's the seeker form?
Yeah.
The seeker form gets done electronically. So I don't fill that answer out. That comes right off the New York State DEC website.
Right.
And they may have said no. I don't remember if they did or not, but that's not something that I can change.
Is the question of the site or the proposed action on lands adjoining the proposed action contain wetlands or other water bodies regulated by federal agencies?
13.
Well, it's not regulated by a federal
It-
agency.
It's state
It's
or
at state or
local.
local.
Federal, state, or
Oh,
local
local.
agency.
Right, so it isn't.
It should be yes.
It should be
Yeah.
yes, right?
Yeah.
Yes, so that should be amended.
Yeah.
But you want to note that for the?
Yes.
In the minute, we'll just make that
Yep.
change in the minutes.
If you go to the last page, the DEC actually tells you, what they checked off or what they responded to. But that one question, I don't get to answer. That's done electronically from their site, based on their database.
Well, we'll just let the record reflect that that's an incorrect answer.
Okay.
Okay, so once more, do I have a motion to approve with that one change in the application? Second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Okay, thank you. Sorry to keep you waiting, but yes, it turned out very well. What we had on the agenda, but we were pretty sure we were not going to get to it, was discussion on Chapter 175, Section 20, Conservation Subdivisions. I think what might be best is to have a special meeting.
Agreed.
So Cheryl, if you could tell us, get back to us on the procedure for a special meeting, and we'll schedule it. And we'll get that done. With that, we have any other business?
Do you have enough information now for
Yes,
that memo?
it's going to be very simple, yes. As
Okay.
long as I haven't lost it,
I-
which I haven't. With that, would somebody like to make a motion to adjourn the meeting?
I have a 7 o'clock meeting, so yes.
Not second.
I'll second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you very much.